Using scientific notation on a calculator, if we were going to input the number 1.5 times 10 to the minus third on a calculator, I have an example of a TI 80 series calculator and an example of a calculator that has a plus minus key, which is right up here, versus a negative sign key, which is separate from the minus operation key. So in using a TI calculator, I would enter 1.5, which we can think of as a coefficient, and then the times 10 part is second key, and this is a double E, although you only see an E come up, and then I would use the little minus sign and the 3. And when I enter this, you will see what the number is in decimals, although if the coefficient, or rather if the power is really large or really small, it will just give it back to you directly in scientific notation. But the E in the designation on the calculator represents the times 10 part. So when you rewrite this number, you need to replace the E with times 10. The other ways you will see this as a double E key, you will see it as an EXP key, and you may see it as a 10 to the X key on a calculator. I will note one of the important things about using this double E key. And of course this was a negative power of 10, so I pushed the negative key before I pushed the 3. Now on a calculator with a plus minus key, you need to input this number a little bit differently. This is the calculator that is on the computer. So if you have a Windows-based PC, you should be able to find a calculator in accessories. So when you go to all programs and accessories, you should see a calculator pop up. And I'm assuming that this calculator is similar to the calculators that you would get on XP, Vista, or Windows 7. They might be a little bit different. There are more than one view for the calculator. Right now I have this in scientific view, but I could put it back to standard view, which just gives me a simplified calculator. But in scientific view, I can do the same thing. So if I put in 1.5, I'm going to use the 10 to the X key. And that's not what I wanted it to do. That's the wrong key to use, as a matter of fact. So it's a good example of seeing that. I'm going to clear this. 1.5, and I'm going to use the EXP key and see it's going to give me a power to put in. I'm going to put in the power 3, and then I'm going to change the sign on that power 3 and push equals, and you see that I finally get the same number as I have on the previous calculator. So it is the EXP key that you would use here. By the way, while I'm talking about this calculator, you might want to notice that there are some unit conversions that you can get on this in the view, and some other little worksheets. But you would find perhaps the scientific view to be the most useful. So let me get rid of the unit conversion stuff. It didn't want to go away. That's okay. The other thing that I wanted to note is why you want to use scientific notation, because I can do exactly the same thing by saying 1.5 times 10 up minus 3 on this calculator, and I get the same number. But there are two reasons why you don't want to use this notation. One of them is, look at the additional keystrokes that you have. That's one. The second reason is you can get yourself into some real problems in calculations. And I'm going to do a calculation correctly. I'm going to take 5 and divide it by 1.3 times 10 to the negative third. So I'm actually taking 5 and dividing it by 0.0013, and I would expect to get a relatively large number. So let's do that. 5 divided by 1.3, and then second double E, because that's a little blue key. Some calculators you won't have to do a second function for that. And then minus 3, enter. Okay, so I get a relatively large number because I'm dividing 5 by a pretty small number. But suppose I use the second way that I put in, suppose I actually use the times 10 and up key. So if I take 5 and divide it by 1.3 times 10, 10 up minus 3 and push enters, you notice my number doesn't look anything the same. And what it did was use an order of operations now, because now I actually have 3 separate numbers in. I have 5, I have 1.3, and I have 10 to the minus 3. And because these are division and multiplication, I think that it just started at the beginning, did the division, and then multiplied the answer by 10 to the minus third. So your original answer for just this part would have been 3.8, and then times 10 to the minus third moved it over 3 times. So there's a huge difference in the value of those two answers. And it is always important using scientific notation to go ahead and use the E key or the double E key, whatever it is, because what it does is make this one number, not two separate numbers, and you always are so much safer. Also, you do not want to do this. 5 and put in the E key and then put in no, that's not the way I wanted to do it. Let me redo this. 5 times 10 and then put in the E key, and then the minus 3. And versus 5 second E minus 3. Notice those are two different numbers, and by putting in that times 10, I made it 10 times bigger than the original number that I wanted. So 5 times 10 to the minus 3 should look like this. And if I put in that 5 times 10, I've made it 10 times larger. So be careful that you don't do that. This designation is the correct one to use. So I've highlighted a couple mistakes that students often use, and I've highlighted the two different types of calculators. So I hope that that will be helpful.